Welcome to the Heritage Foundation. I'm Genevieve Wood, and I'm delighted to personally welcome you today. Whether you came from across the street or across the globe, we're glad you're here. At Heritage, we believe ideas shape the future, and that you have a role to play in that. That's why we host events on the biggest challenges and opportunities facing our country. These events are spaces for real conversation, bold ideas, and principled solutions. No matter if you're a seasoned policy expert, a passionate advocate, or simply just curious about the issues that shape our society, you're welcome here. So pull up a seat, ask questions, engage with us, and be part of something bigger than politics, the fight for the soul of our nation. Thanks again for joining us, and please enjoy the program.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program. Please welcome Roger Severino, the Heritage Foundation's Vice President of Domestic Policy.
Well, good morning. Quiz. Think back, what did you have for breakfast today? So, when I was a kid, I grew up poor in Los Angeles. I would have Frosted Flakes and milk. I would have concentrated orange juice, if we had orange juice. It was never fresh, ever. You know, the frozen one that had that nasty ring around it. You remember those? I ate it when it was cold, yeah. I would often eat Spam, Vienna sausages, and at night, TV dinners. So, you might say I'm lucky to still be around, having had that as my staple day after day after day, and it wasn't much better even on the subsidized lunches at my public school that I went to. You know, the mystery meats. And last night I actually had a wonderful dinner at a restaurant where it was farm to table and delicious food, freshly prepared. Very, very expensive though, right? So we've made some progress in that there are at least options with regards to our food and diet. But what are we here to talk about? How did we get to the point where the American diet progressively got worse for decades, and it led to so many chronic diseases that we are beset with? And, you know, Ben Franklin said an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. He also said that the best medicine is rest and fasting. Fasting meaning eating in moderation or sometimes skipping meals. And that was Ben Franklin, right? So the wisdom that we had at the founding with respect to respecting the land, respecting our role in the world of cooperation with nature to our benefit, we've lost a lot of that wisdom. And there have been a lot of forces that have made a whole lot of money on making sure Americans stay sick and are permanent patients. So we're here to address some of those issues, educate ourselves, me included, as to how we got here and what are the alternatives to the system we have inherited, and what it means for Americans' health and welfare, especially children. Now, President Trump and RFK Jr. have kicked off the MAHA revolution, and we want to make heritage a key component in that effort. Conservative principles, living the good life, going against big interests, sticking up for the little guy, things that President Trump and Bobby Kennedy have been champions of, because people realize there's something wrong here. We shouldn't be sicker than the rest of the industrialized world. One of the key architects of the MAHA revolution has been Calley, who will be our first speaker today. Calley is a senior advisor for the MAHA initiative at the White House. He's a former Heritage Foundation intern. He works to align healthcare spending with habits proven to prevent and reverse disease, nutritious food, exercise, sleep, and stress management. He's the co-founder of Truemed, enabling the use of tax-free HSA dollars, great policy program, and FSA funds for healthy lifestyle choices. He's co-author of Good Energy with his sister, Dr. Casey Means. Through his work in policy, business, and media, Calley is advancing solutions to create a healthier America from the ground up. Please join me in welcoming Calley Means.
Thank you, Roger. And God, I just can't get out of my head. As a intern many years ago at the Heritage Foundation, I really couldn't imagine in the past couple of months we'd be having events with medical freedom advocates and psychedelic researchers and many folks in this room. It was probably the first time entering the Heritage Foundation. I just want to give a round of applause to the Heritage Foundation for convening this incredible coalition. And I think it really feels right. I think everyone in this room hopefully feels that this very unexpected MAHA coalition that's tacked on to the MAGA movement, there's something right about it. There's something spiritual about it. And I think that is because we're facing a conundrum as a country right now. As we've talked about a lot, we are facing civilizational stakes when it comes to health. The stat we talk about, the White House, Secretary Kennedy talks about, I can't wrap my head around 38% of our teens have prediabetes and 50% of our teens are overweight or obese. I mean, this is a moral stain on our country. And when you look at our civilizational debt issues and budgetary issues, I mean, it's not defense. I mean, defense is 11%. We're spending almost 30% of our budget on metabolic-based conditions. We are the sickest country in the world. We're spending 3 to 4 times more than any other country in the world on healthcare, and we're living 7, 8 years less than many other developed countries. We have a civilizational issue, and what's the conundrum is that, just as a factual statement, these conditions, 90 to 95% of medical costs are tied to foodborne illnesses, are tied to preventable conditions that are tied to our food. And I think the biggest issue facing our country is why is that the case and our farmers are suffering so much? Why are family farms closing so much? Farmers' children are not going into the business. Farmers are getting kicked and degraded at every turn and suffering. And they are the key to solving this healthcare crisis demonstrably. And we have a real generational problem there. And the reason we're here is because that frustration, that conundrum has been channeled into a political movement with this unlikely collaboration of President Trump and Bobby Kennedy. And just as it's just extraordinary that this coalition is being assembled at the White House, I could not believe when Secretary Kennedy walked on that stage, probably some of us were there on that first day when he endorsed President Trump, the electricity in the room was the most powerful political moment I've ever seen in my life. President Trump later noted it was the most electric scene he's seen during the campaign. It surprised everyone how this visceral connection that Bobby touched on, this almost unidentifiable complexity of this connection between our food and our health, electrified voters. And it brought a lot of people into that coalition. The reason we're here is because this very complex issue was channeled into a real political movement that brought women, it closed the gender gap, it brought 50-50 for Trump on independence and young people. It showed us that a new political coalition could be built around these issues. And in the first 150 days, we have achieved significant wins on this issue. And I want to make that very clear. We have achieved, the Trump administration, I believe, the most significant food policy reform in American history. In just the first year, we are going to reform our GRAS system at the FDA, where we're actually going to know what's in our food, where the FDA is actually going to take a stronger hand to actually know what's in our food, study it, and regulate it, which I think is very important. We have achieved SNAP reform, where 21 states, that list is growing, have taken soda off of SNAP. It is inconceivable that our 4th largest entitlement program, 18% of that money goes to soda and candy. Never thought possible that this would change. It's the top issue for the various lobbyists in town, but we have been able to take soda and candy off of SNAP. We are going to have revolutionary and transformative nutrition guidelines coming up very soon that actually tell the truth about what children should be eating. We are going to have front-of-pack labeling and transparency that people from both sides of the aisle have been talking about, that's needed for 20 years. It's never happened. It's going to happen this year. We're going to have an ultra-processed food definition. And I think very importantly, the NIH, this $50 billion pot of money, this stated goal of the NIH is to not ask with that $50 billion that people are sick as a given, how do we have incremental little shots to manage those diseases? What is actually the root cause of why we have an explosion of all these metabolic conditions, and really understand and put food and research on food at the center of how we think about health. despite all these policy wins, there is obviously visceral frustration still among many in the MAHA base. And I think the flip side of this tidal wave of support and animation around the bonding of Secretary and President Trump does come with existential dread that many voters feel. And I think we do feel like we're in a civilizational crisis here, that there's a crisis, a spiritual crisis between our respect for, what we put in our bodies and our soils. And I think that a big challenge we have is really rectifying this intense optimism we feel with the sense that we cannot move fast enough and the administration needs to be moving faster. And I have a couple thoughts on that and a couple thoughts on how to make this coalition successful and some principles I'm thinking about. First, we have to understand this is a long-term fight. We all, I think, are aligned, and I think most Americans are aligned on the situation and the stakes. We have lost touch with what's happening to our soil, how that connects to our physical, economic, geopolitical, and spiritual survival. We've become disconnected from the root cause of what's making us sick. And I think what we're building towards and the bridge we're building towards is really a fundamental realignment where we are shifting the trillions and trillions of dollars that right now we spend $5 trillion a year waiting for people to get sick from food and then managing their conditions and making healthcare companies very rich. And we have to fundamentally shift our incentives as a country to put that money towards helping the root cause of what's making us sick, and that's farmers. And this is a big, big, big challenge. And we must understand this takes years. A group that comes here a lot to the Heritage Foundation is the Federalist Society. And I do think it's notable that they put the goal in 1982 to overturn Roe v. Wade. And that took 40 years. And that is also, in their minds, a civilizational life and death issue that cannot come fast enough. But it is true that the way coalitions have power is recognizing an existential, societally defining cultural change that's needed and forming a coalition and being patient. And I am radical here. I think the sick care industrial complex and these forces, they killed my mom. And I think a lot of us feel like the fighting and the victories cannot come soon enough. But I do think we have to understand that this will be strategic and will take time. We also must understand this movement, if we're talking about the political realities, and I do think this movement is much more than political, it's cultural, but it does run through the political success of President Trump and Secretary Kennedy. If this movement is going to stay alive, we have to show as voters that we support what's happening. And I do think a lot of the success of this movement runs through midterm voters making clear that we're continuing to vote on this issue. That's going to affect the 2028 election. And if the 2028 elections is impacted, there's going to be a mandate for the future administration. We have to continue to show as voters that we are supportive and are voting on this issue, because that impact and that voter mandate is how we've been able to make change. We must understand the deep state is real. I would suggest, as we're frustrated, we don't attack Secretary Kennedy and President Trump. And I can tell you, there's never been an administration in modern American history that has a mandate to stand up to special interests more and get wins. They are fighting against a deep state that is unimaginable, and entrenched economic interests and entrenched dysfunction that is impossible to comprehend. And they are our warriors here, and I think we need to turn our attention and our fire on the deep state that is trying to obstruct them. We also have to understand that as many policy victories that happen, and they will, what our real advantage is a cultural societal awakening. I think whether we're frustrated or not with the pace of political change, there's something real happening in this country where people are understanding what they're eating more. They're looking at labels. They're looking at where their food is coming from. They're asking their doctor more questions. And I do think that's what is going to eventually impact the political system. And we need to continually to be optimistic and hopeful and foster and talk about and educate and have that societal change happening, because the thing that's going to change the political system is that societal change. We have to understand we're up against very, very powerful forces, and I have empathy for that. There are many, 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 many people in America that are employed by the existing system. We need to build bridges, and particularly, I think this is true with agriculture. We are not going to win if the soybean farmers and the corn growers are our enemy. We need to have empathy for people in the agriculture community and understand that we are all aligned on this 10-year vision where the American farmer is held up as the foremost important person in our healthcare system, and that our soil and that our food is respected. This is a vision everyone agrees on, and we have to understand that we need to build alliances with entities that employ more people than almost any industry in the country. This is a civilizational fight. And I soon realized after my mom died that preaching doom and gloom really doesn't work. We've got to break this issue down. We've got to deliver tangible wins. And I understand how difficult this is, because we do feel like we're fighting this battle that's generational and change can't come fast enough, but we have to have dialogue to figure out the incremental wins that are impossible to disagree with. I love the SNAP issue because there's so much opposition to that, but it is impossible to argue. It's really hard to argue for government-funded soda for kids. It's a beautiful issue because as the issues become more complex, they're really hard to pick apart by adversaries. So I do think it's really important that we channel our urges into wins that are impossible to disagree with and politically resonant to continue to substantiate the momentum of this issue in the political sphere. And my gut is over the next year, as we look beyond the initial wins, my gut is there's real power in school lunches and other areas where government spends money. It makes zero sense when the government spends money to be underwriting ultra-processed food and metabolic dysfunction for kids, which eventually bankrupts state Medicaid budgets and costs us down the road in healthcare and poisons our kids and poisons our human capital. I'll wrap just by saying this is I think looking at American history, one of the potential turning points in American history, when you read history books, history changes when political coalitions change. And I do think the MAHA movement, what's represented in this room at the Heritage Foundation, this unexpected group, I do think we're at one of the 2 to 3 most defining changes to the political coalitions in this country, where people that maybe never even thought about voting Republican enthusiastically voted for President Trump. And we need to keep this coalition together, and that's going to be hard. It's going to be very complex, but the most important thing is we keep hope alive and we have messy, robust dialogue, and that's why this event is so important, and I thank the Heritage Foundation for that. So let's have a great day, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Calley. Next up, we have Ryland Engelhart. Ryland is co-founder and co-executive director of American Regeneration, a partner at Sovereignty Ranch, and producer of the films Kiss the Ground, Common Ground, and Groundswell. Longtime leader in the health and wellness space, Ryland helped pioneer and manage the nationally recognized plant-based restaurant chains Café Gratitude, Gracias Madre, and he is a passionate advocate for regenerative agriculture, food as medicine, and building community. He lives with his wife and 2 young sons on a 200-acre regenerative ranch in Texas, where he is learning to practice what he preaches. Please welcome Ryland Engelhart.
Yeah, wow, thank you. I just want to say, as a vegan climate activist in California starting a decade ago in my garage, to be here at the Heritage Foundation, bringing some of the best and the brightest practitioners and industry leaders in regenerative agriculture is a blessing. And my time is short. We have a 3-minute video called Making Farming Profitable Again. And that is really about getting off the increasing costs of agriculture and getting back to God's creation, the way that soil works, and the way that soil has always given this planet abundance. So I'm introducing a short clip from a film called Common Ground, and I hope you enjoy it, and it will set up today's conversation about what is regenerative agriculture.
Like many modern farms in America, this one is large, and it's run by only a few people. But unlike other big modern farms, this farmer has become famous for making a profit while rebuilding his soil.
What we have here to my left, this is the neighbor's cropland field of soybeans, was eroded by wind. To the right here, this is my land. It's in perennial pasture. This is a shelter belt tree windbreak to protect the soil. They had tilled their field, then they had planted soybeans. Then we had 50-mile-an-hour winds for 3 days. Because they had nothing growing there except the soybean, the wind caused that soil to be blown away. But unfortunately, you see the same type of agriculture. Not only in the US, worldwide. The 6 principles of a healthy soil ecosystem are: number 1, working within the context of nature with our local environment in mind. Number 2, least amount of mechanical, chemical disturbance possible. Number 3, armor on the soil. Nature always tries to keep the soil covered. Number 4, you have to have diversity. Where in nature do you see a monoculture? Number 5, living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. And number 6 is animal and insect integration.
I have not taken a government subsidy since 2019. I no longer take any crop insurance. We've eliminated seed treatments. We've eliminated insecticides, pesticides, herbicides. It works out to be about $2 million a year in savings. That is serious cash. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and I have 2 beautiful grandchildren. They are not going to be around chemicals. And that's my legacy, is to have a viable, regenerating, no-till system to hand off to the next generation. And that's what we're doing.
We looked at 100 corn and soy farmers across the Midwest that had been successful in their adoption of soil health management practices. And on average, 88% of the farmers interviewed were making more money.
We can shift production agriculture over to regenerative agriculture while increasing profit. We can go down the regenerative path, heal our soils, our rivers, our streams, our estuaries, heal communities, heal people. Or we can continue down the path we are, a path of degradation. Humanity has a choice to make.
Please welcome Jennifer Galardi, Senior Policy Analyst for Restoring American Wellness at Heritage.
How about giving a round of applause to Ryland and that beautiful film? Can't wait to see all of it. In the summer of 2021, I attended a Labor Day gathering at a yoga retreat center called Commune in Topanga Canyon, California. It was in that kitchen, chopping vegetables, that I met Ryland. At one point, as he mentioned, Ryland was the owner of the most popular C and B scene vegan restaurant in Los Angeles. He is the epitome of good vibes only in the best possible way. It was his warmth that made me feel comfortable in the liberal lion's den I found myself in that day. After years of leftist indoctrination, I had been slowly coming around to realizing I am, at heart, very much a conservative. Shocking, working for Heritage, I know. I also quickly discovered that my new worldview tended to be frowned upon in Los Angeles. For the next 15 minutes, Ryland and I talked about the land, farming, the environment, and how it all impacts the food we eat and ultimately human health and flourishing. I told him I'd be returning to Pepperdine University the very next week to work on my master's degree in public policy. I had wanted to take the knowledge I had gained from years of working in the fitness and nutrition industries to help shape policy and encourage a very simple philosophy, which you've heard throughout the introductions today: food as medicine. I'll never forget Ryland's words of encouragement. Good for you. We need people like you in DC. I don't know if you remember, but that's what you said to me. Here we are 4 years later, almost to the day. Ryland and American Regeneration have been excellent partners in this event, and I'd like to thank them. Life update, Ryland and I both escaped California. He is running a regenerative ranch in Texas, and from what I hear, even hosting a pig roast from time to time. And here I am, a conservative hippie, in my dream job at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much, Jay Richards. And the entire event team here at Heritage. This event would not be possible without them, so thank you. Conserving the land and soil God has blessed our country with, living in harmony with it to grow abundant, vital, and nourishing food, health and flourishing for every American. These are not Republican or Democrat issues. These are human imperatives, and we are all here today to figure out the best way to ensure everyone's needs are met. It's a great honor to introduce to you three gentlemen who I believe play a pivotal role in helping to achieve those goals. Rick Clark, whom you saw in this film, is a fifth-generation farmer that cares deeply about soil health and human health. The principles of soil health are the foundation of his regenerative organic stewardship system approach. He has been no-tilling for 18 years and using cover crops for 14 years. He has removed all inputs, again, as he mentioned in the film, of fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide, seed treatments, and tillage, and is building a regenerative system that is profitable and viable for the next generation. David Stelzer is a founder and longtime CEO of Azure Standard and Azure Farm, a pioneering force in the U.S. organic and non-GMO food movement. Also a fifth-generation farmer, Stelzer began farming organically as a teenager in the 1970s, driven by a belief in healthy soil and chemical-free food. By age 21, he was delivering grain from the family farm to local customers via his truck, efforts that grew into the founding of Azure Standard in 1987. Under his leadership, Azure Standard has grown into a nationwide distributor serving millions of individual and retail customers, I believe even your farm, Ryland, through his more than 4,000 community drops in almost every state in the U.S. Throughout his career, Stelzer has championed sustainable farming, soil health, and access to affordable organic whole foods, inspiring both innovation and community-based distribution in the natural food industry. And finally, the one and only Joel Salatin. For those of you who don't know Joel, you will not forget him after this introduction. Joel calls himself a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. Those who like him call him the most famous farmer in the world, the high priest of the pasture, and the most eclectic thinker from Virginia since Thomas Jefferson. Those who don't like him, there's some, call him a bioterrorist, typhoid Mary, charlatan, and starvation advocate. Welcome, you're very at home here at Heritage. With his family, Joel co-owns Polyface Farm in Swoop, Virginia. The farm services more than 5,000 families, 10 restaurants, and 5 retail outlets with salad bar beef, pigerator pork, pastured poultry, and forestry products. The farm ships nationwide to doorsteps. When he's not on the road speaking, he's at home at the farm, keeping the calluses on his hands and the dirt under his fingernails, mentoring young people, inspiring visitors, and promoting local regenerative food and farming systems. I could go on and on about these men, but their words will be much more entertaining than mine. Every day, they are practicing regenerative agriculture with all its challenges and its rewards to ensure farmers have an alternative to modern farming. So let's welcome them off the farm and onto the stage. Making this trip here to DC. So Rick and David I believe you two have both transitioned your farms from conventional to organic. You've always been, right, Joel? Right. So this first question is for you two, because I think people really want to know is, how do you do this? How much time does it take? So if you could tell us a little bit about that, why you made the switch, and maybe how long it takes and some of the most difficult challenges.
Sure. Thank you again. I'm honored to be here today. This is quite an historic event. So let's let this be the beginning of some great momentum. Thank you. We've been on this journey of regenerative before it was even called regenerative for about 18 years. And then when I realized that we can start to raise these crops with limited inputs to no inputs, that's when I decided to go organic. The other reason why I decided to go organic was when I look back at my family tree and I start looking at an uncle that died of cancer, a sister-in-law died of cancer, 24-year-old nephew had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, diabetes. All of these things start to get you to wonder why. And the common denominator comes back to the farm. So that was the real push that made me decide to make this farm to eliminate all those harmful inputs.
And then what are some of the biggest challenges, and how long did it take?
Yeah, the challenges are it's a totally different mindset of farming. The current farming environment has a huge red easy button that they can push every day. It's chemicals, it's tillage, it's whatever makes the job easy. And to get the mindset to leave that comfort zone, that's difficult. And when we started to make the transition to organic, we have a fairly large farm. It's what I would call to scale. When you have to abide by the organic rules, which are fine, you have to keep your non-organic crops segregated. Well, we farm about 7,000 acres. We've got a 600,000 bushel granary. It's very hard to keep that stuff isolated. So I made the push to go organic in 4 years, which I would not recommend that, but I understood the value of getting there as soon as we could, and I wanted to start really zeroing in on building soil health and building human health.
David?
So I'm really the second generation organic farmer. My father made the choice to switch to organic and regenerative. Both words really weren't very popular at that time. He did it for health reasons also. I was very, very ill, was not expected to live. And my parents made some health choices with diet change, which I regained my health. And my father became convicted that the conventional agriculture was what was destroying my life and his health and our family. And so in 1973, way before it was cool, he switched to organic agriculture. And initially, the original transition that he did actually took a long time. I would say it was close to 10 years before the soil regenerated enough. We're in a dry area, so we're 9 inches of rainfall a year. So it's a little bit longer to get soil microbes going in the drier areas. But since then, he originally transitioned about 2,000 acres. We've added another 2,400 since then that I've transitioned over in various ways. But I've learned a lot, and our team has learned a lot. We use soil microbes, we use tissue testing, we use a lot of different things that we're able to use, and we've been able to transition those places much faster. In fact, we almost don't have yield loss in the transition now. Now, there's a lot to that. I can't say that it's a simple button. It's very difficult to do, but it can be done. And so we transition in the 3-year mandated period by the organic standards pretty easily. So that's.
So what I'm hearing is it's not for the faint of heart, right? It's going to take some grit, some perseverance. So Joel, I'm kind of curious, and I think a lot of people are, is there a place for both conventional and regenerative agriculture? And can you be regenerative without being organic? Are there some compromises or inputs that farmers may make maybe to the transition of full regenerative that might make them feel more comfortable with it?
Yeah, well, you certainly can be compatible as far as whatever the world is concerned. I mean, we don't ask for the elimination of conventional farms. What we do is, by being able to produce what we do, a lot of it doesn't have anything to do with chemicals, like controlled grazing for cattle, for example. We run about 1,000 head of cattle, and we move them every day. Little we call it mob stocking, herbivorous solar conversion, lignified carbon sequestration, fertilization. Yes, I do practice that in front of the mirror. And what that does, that's not conventional or organic. That's just mimicking nature, the way herbivores run in nature. But what it does is it increases our production by like 300% over the conventional people who don't do that. So, other things that one of the reasons we're not organic certified is because we couldn't do a lot of the things that we do. For example, we make compost with pigs. Rather than using expensive equipment and petroleum to turn compost, we use pigs to do it, and that's not allowed under organic certification. So there are a lot of issues that we have with the organic certification that keeps us locked out of it to be actually more profitable and more ecological.
My last question is your one policy change, and I have a funny feeling that would feed into that. So, but I'll hold it. Anybody kind of who wants to answer this, what would your response be to those who contend there's no difference in nutrient density between food grown organically or regenerative via conventional? Essentially, who might think, well, organic's kind of a scam. That was just another way for the government to make money. How do we know for sure that these are more nutrient dense? Anybody have a?
I mean, the tests are incredible. I mean, what the Dan Kittredge at the Bionutrient Food Association has done in the preliminary work of measuring these, but we've done independent studies. For example, our eggs have the USDA label on eggs is 48 micrograms of folic acid per egg. I'll just pick one, 48 micrograms per egg. Ours averaged 1,038. Instead of 48. These are not little 10% changes. Grass-finished beef often has 300% more riboflavin than corn-fed, which is a calming, essential. So yeah, the studies are pretty obvious. Conjugated linoleic acid. I mean, you could just go down the line. There's no comparison.
Anybody else want to see
the same thing with our products? The testing is there every time, so it's not just magic that happens. It's real.
And not only does the testing work, which we've done the same thing, but I will give, from a personal standpoint, and dealing with hundreds of thousands of customers throughout the country that are living this. In my personal life, I grew up the sickly kid. My wife as well. When we changed our diet, speaking to a little bit what Calley spoke about just a little bit ago, we changed our diet completely to an organic, regenerative-based diet, 100%. We raised 11 children without ever having to have one of them see a doctor, except for one broken femur. It makes a difference.
Yeah. Proof is in the pudding. That's, yeah, I think another prominent question is, I can't remember if it was Roger or Calley who mentioned it, is, how right now all of these things are considered a luxury good, right? Healthy food, organic, and it does show at the checkout at the grocery store. David, I want you specifically to speak about this. I'll give the other two a chance first, but because that's kind of your claim to fame with Azure, is that it is affordable. But is there a way to scale that? Is it just a matter of scaling it so it's more available? How do we scale? And I think, Rick, you might have the largest amount of acreage, if I'm not mistaken. You've done it on a very large scale. So why don't you talk to how you've been able to do that and then what you see in the future?
Yeah. It's going to be like everything else. We have to understand that we just cannot come in and have a wrecking ball just destroy everything. We have to make this slow and methodical, like Calley was talking about. This is going to be, in my opinion, a movement that needs to move across administrations. And for that to happen, it's going to take all of us. And that's how I view what we're trying to do with the products that we're raising. You have to make easy transitions. You get the consumer aware of what you're doing, and then honestly, word of mouth is your best friend. And I know that sounds a little sixth grade, but it's real. And that's how we're trying to. We have an online meat market. We do sell meat online. You always get the same customers back every time, and then there's always a few more that come from word of mouth after that.
Seems like simple business practices work no matter what. Yeah. Either Joel or David, which one you want to go next?
Being an elitist.
Oh, elitist, thanks. Well, that was exactly my thought at the very beginning, is how do we create healthy food that's affordable to the average family? Because, so after we started farming organically, it became, and we're trying to sell the crop, we would see our product 4 or 5 times the price that we got for it. And it was, by the time it got into retail. And so when I started delivering food to retailers primarily, so it's very hard to get into distribution nationally. That's a really tough space. And so I had to basically cut that out. I was kind of young and stupid and didn't realize it was almost impossible. So I started distributing. That's exactly what has to happen. We have to have farmers connected with the consumers. And that's what I've spent my entire career doing. Azure has become the distribution network to connect the regenerative growers with consumers. And that's exactly what we have to have. And no, it doesn't have to be more expensive. I just had a customer tell me a couple weeks ago that they did a huge price comparison with conventional from their local grocery store and Azure's organic, compared it side by side, and after some things were higher, some things were lower, but after adding it all together, that they were able to eat organic food at about 5% less than they would have eaten standard conventional fare bought in standard American packaging in a major grocery retailer. So, no.
That's just the beginning. I mean, think about the reduction of medical expenses that come with this.
Yeah, which is what I was going to bring up, that in the last 50 years, the average per capita expenditure, household expenditure on healthcare has gone from 9% to 18%, and the average per capita expenditure on food has gone from 18% down to 9%. Those two numbers have directly inverted.
Right.
Is it possible that there's a relationship between the two? As far as the the pricing, right now, one of our Polyface pasture-raised Beyond Organic chickens is less per pound than skinless boneless breast at Walmart from Tyson. Boneless skinless breast is a luxury item. And goodness, Lunchables. Lunchables are $14 a pound.
Wow.
Ultra processed food is not cheap. I want to go buy these shopping carts that are half full of Mountain Dew and Coca-Cola that isn't food anyway, and people complaining about the price of food. And let's take out all the stuff that's junk and not food, and let's actually look at the price of food. And processed food is very, very expensive. If you take the ingredients for DiGiorno's frozen pizza and make that yourself from your own Azure standard grains, if you make that, you can make it for way, way less. So we actually post comparisons in our retail store and in our website with other things, and very, very price competitive, if not on a lot of things lower. In fact, during COVID, we were half the price of the meat in the grocery store.
Well, I think that's too with policy. We always talk about the hidden costs, right? What are the hidden costs of subsidies and things like this, healthcare? But you do bring up something interesting, because you mentioned, if someone cooked their own pizza. So what part of education, and I'm thinking of an inner city family, right? The mom, maybe a single mother that's really just trying to make the ends meet. What other circumstances or what other changes need to be in place for that to happen, for there to be time and the capacity to understand this stuff, just the educational component. And I guess what I'm getting at is maybe a little bit of what Calley talked about, is this more cultural revolution, this spiritual reawakening, right? Kind of a return to the deeper things, the first principles and things like that.
As a culture, we don't put attention on food. Food is basically a problem pit stop between what's the important things in life. And you go to any other country in the world and they've got, cultural food icons, and you can go and eat squid and all sorts of things. But in America, food tends to be looked at as just bodily fuel to power you while you go, do your business. And we do not have that kind of sacred honoring food culture in our culture. We just don't. And so once we can change that, or once people understand that, and it's one awareness at a time, like the stories that we hear, one awareness at a time, and they, people finally get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that that's actually happening, at least from what I've seen, especially, when COVID happened and lots of people began to cook at home. And I think the vast majority haven't gone back away from that completely. And at least, that's what we're seeing amongst our, our base, is that cooking at home has become a new, really cool thing to do. And absolutely, you can save a ton of money cooking at home, plus get a much higher nutrient content. And that education piece is going to be a big key to this revolution, not to mention force restaurants and such to change into healthier options.
Yeah, and excuse me, Joel. And then that, in my opinion, is what's going to drive the farming community to make the change. This is all going to come through MAHA. And it's going to be driven through MAHA. It's going to make a generational change in society to demand that we want to know where our food's coming from, how's it being made, what's it being processed with, what are all the ingredients, and then that's going to trickle down to the USDA. Now, this is just Rick spitballing here. This is going to trickle down to the USDA, and that's what's then going to drive the implementation change to the farming.
May I just say one other thing about the price, especially because we're in livestock, I think more than, and one of the big things that we talk about at our farm is that at least for livestock, pastured livestock, you're moving them around, and we run 1,000 hogs, 1,000 head of cattle, 30,000 chickens. I mean, this is not a backyard operation, but we have zero vet bill. I mean, no vet bill, nothing. But it does take people. It takes people. And so we have strategically chosen to substitute energy intensity, capital intensity, pharmaceutical intensity, chemical intensity for people. And one of the problems is, and even equipment intensity. And one of the problems is that U.S. tax code does everything possible to make it difficult to have people. That's why every company is trying to get rid of people, going to robots, going to machines, getting, you can go abuse your tractor and claim it as a depreciation and replace it as an expense and get help your tax situation. But we have all sorts of withholding and minimum wage requirements and OSHA requirements, and I'm not saying I want to abuse anybody, but I am suggesting that when that the tax policy and tax and people and employment policy is all written to make people very, very expensive, and energy, pharmaceuticals, equipment, chemicals, all those things very, very cheap. And that creates a skewed market price point when we come to market. And that's, I think, something that a lot of people don't appreciate.
And I think that's really important that you pointed out how policy can really affect stuff that you wouldn't think about. Labor policy, right, affects the family farm and things. So, we say it's an apolitical movement, but I will get a little political because we are a political organization in some ways. How much does this green revolution narrative hurt you in that cow farts are the problem, this very anti-meat, because from what I understand with regenerative, it's using all of God's resources, animals, soil, microbes, right? So if you have a farm without animals, pigs creating the fertilizer, it's going to be harder to be regenerative. So how do you combat that kind of anti-animal, humans are the problem, cows are the problem, everything God has given us is the problem, which tends to be, yes, more of a leftist narrative?
Well, 1 acre of healthy perennial pasture has enough methanotrophic bacteria to suck down the methane generated by 1,000 cows per acre. So, again, when Diana Rogers wrote, Sacred Cow, it's not the cow, it's the how. And so, you can do almost anything, education, investment, recreation, cows. You can do it well or you can do it poorly. You can make it a liability or an asset, and it all depends on how you manage it.
That's one of the things with modern agriculture today is that, okay, you have a whole bunch of cows together, and then they create waste that now has to be dealt with. In regenerative, you're the one dealing with your own waste. That goes into the soil. That becomes the fertilizer for tomorrow. And then you don't have to take all this petroleum inputs to put on the soil to try to make the crops grow, because it's a circle. It's the circle of life, as it's been for thousands of years. We just help it along a little bit and try to get things in the right spot at the right time. and making sure that all the nutrients and the minerals and everything are in place for the microbes to really work. We're really talking about the microbes pulling, the soil that we have transitioned from organic has gone from, humus content sometimes of less than 1%, typically up to 5% and greater. That's like, 5 to 10 times the amount of carbon in that soil that conventional agriculture has in. It's not a mystery. Agriculture is probably, the biggest factor when it comes to changing the environment. Like it or not, it's the reality.
Yeah, and if I could go a little bit further with the row crop aspect, we do have livestock, but not to the degree that these guys have. We have to understand that what's available to us. Do you realize that if you go outside, there's about 30,000 tons of free available nitrogen above every acre of ground? 30,000 tons. And how much does a farmer need to raise corn? About 125 or 130 pounds. So we need to educate the farmer on how to implement the practices that retrieve and pull that nitrogen into the system to where you no longer need inputs. And that's what we're doing. We're doing, these guys have cattle grazing. We've got, our livestock are the microbes under the ground. Those guys are working all the time. And you need to have that. Right now at home, for example, we are raising organic corn with 0 inputs. No nitrogen, no P, no K, no chemistry, nothing. But you can't do that, right? You can't do that. But you can. So we have to understand, though, the next phase to push this thing is education. We have to understand how to educate the educators to then teach the farmers. And that's why I like this event, because you folks are open-minded. You're not arrogant to the point to where we already know what to say in public. No, we're learning what we're going to say in public, because we have to say the right things. And another thing, I'm going to assume that a consumer is very similar to a farmer. You give a farmer one chance of changing something. If it doesn't work, they're never coming back. And I'm assuming the consumer is probably the same type of buyer. If that product did not meet their expectations, that's a big thing right there. It's not so much what we say it could be, it's what their expectation of what that product is. And if it doesn't meet their expectation, they're not going to come back. So we have to be very cautious of how we move forward here. And that's why this is such an important gathering today.
Yeah, the beauty of biological systems is that scale creates synergy through relational complexity. The liability of chemical systems is that it regresses at scale, creating ecological competition through relational simplicity.
See it every day. See it every day. I'll throw out another little tidbit here. Hopefully we're not going off the rails here, but maybe that's where you got to go sometimes.
I'm going off the rails.
When I drive around my community at home, and I look at our neighbors' fields, there's one weed that always raises its head to the top, and that weed is called water hemp. It is a offshoot of red root pigweed, okay? Now, does anybody know what year the GMOs were started? Does anybody know? 1997 was a soybean. From 1997 to 2008, that's all it took on our farm. We had water hemp that was resistant to Roundup. Think about that. You think we're going to go out here and tell Mother Nature how to do her job? In 11 years, the plant figured out how to be resistant to the chemistry. Okay, so back to where I was going with this. When I drive around to the community that I farm in, and none of our fields have had chemistry on them in at least 10 years, some 12. Do we have any water hemp grown on our farm anywhere? No. Water hemp grows in all the fields that have chemistry sprayed on them. Why? But the farmers don't know, they've not been told, they don't understand. They see a water hemp, they see a giant ragweed, we got to go spray another pass of chemistry. That's the mentality. So we have to understand that this is the heritage of the farm. This is their livelihood. This is how they were taught by their father, how their father taught them. So we can't just go in with a wrecking ball and expect change. So I think, you know, you need folks like Joel and Gabe Brown. You need teachers that are really pushing the limits here.
Anybody want to add anything? No? Okay. So last question. Doesn't have to be a lightning round. We have some minutes, but if you could wave your magic wand, maybe not take a wrecking ball, maybe just cast a slight spell.
A little pixie dust?
Yeah, that's fine. We like, pixie dust. What policy change would you make that would make this easier for someone to transition, or just for our culture to understand the whole principles and then make them successful and viable?
Who wants to go first? You want me to go? I'm not, this is a tough question for me. Because I live in a different world than where policy is being made. But we need to have the tools available to the teachers and the farmers. All right, I'll just go ahead and lay out what I would do. This is what I would do. I would regionalize the United States. I'd have 9 regions. And within each region, I would have an ambassador that implemented the principles of soil health within that region. And then that ambassador is teaching other teachers below them to then go out to the workforce, the farmer, the gals and the guys that are getting this done every single day, and show them how to implement the regenerative practices in the proper way in the context that they're in. You're not going to farm the same way in New Mexico as you're going to farm in Iowa. If you do, havoc is coming in a major way. The system is going to crumble. So we have to understand how to do that. So I guess my policy change would be to stop looking at farming as it's this way or not that way. You've got to make it contextual to where the farmer is, not only in their journey, their landscape, the topography, and how thick is their skin, and how willing are they to take on risk, because there's risk involved.
I also think that that's a big part of it, is the risk factor. The average farm, the average conventional farm, at least in our country, they actually make more of their profit on crop insurance and other government subsidies than they actually do on selling the crop that they have. So they're tied. They feel like their hands are tied. They're tied into the program, the commodities program that they're in, because if I am not in this program, then I'm going to lose my livelihood. So there has to be a bridge or some kind of a gap. Now, I'm not risk averse, so I went out, but basically I haven't received an agricultural government subsidy in my lifetime. Our farm has never received them. I even bought some land with CRP ground on it, and they won't pay it to me. So I have to keep it out of production until the end of the contract, but they won't pay me. So that's because I've changed the way that we do agriculture. And we are not doing standardized best practices. But yet, from a financial perspective, now, I can, economically, our farm is makes 5 times as much as any of their farms. But that transition was not, that was not easy. We had to eat pretty slim for a few years during the transition of the original farm. And so if there's a policy that can change, if we could spend 1% of the money that's spent on farm subsidies and medical subsidies on regenerative agriculture, even research. How do we actually research how to deal with, biological changes? How can we affect the biology in our soil? How can we create biological transformation to change weeds that were, he was talking about? That can all be done biologically, and without any budget, and just doing backyard research, we've come tremendous light years ahead. We can do that. In the last 40 years, that's progressed, but it's all been in farmers' garages, and which is good. It's made a major difference. But that's, I think the policy has gotten the farmers stuck. If we can unstick that so that they're not locked into the commodity, that's probably the biggest change.
Mine is real simple. How do we unstick farmers? We give a food emancipation proclamation so that farmers can sell to their neighbors without asking the government's permission. Thousands and thousands of wannabe entrepreneurial small farmers who are ready to access their neighbors with chicken pot pie, charcuterie, raw milk, name it, kefir, butter, but they can't because it takes a $500,000 licensing compliance process with 10 bureaucrats hanging over their shoulders. That's the answer to urban food deserts. It's the answer to everything. It doesn't take a dime of taxpayer money, doesn't take a government agency. It only unleashes liberty and freedom in the food system. We have an enslaved food system that is shackled by a plethora of government agencies and bureaucracies keeping neighbors from being able to do business with each other. You shouldn't have to ask the government's permission to sell a bowl of tomato soup to your neighbor. That should not require a government position. And so, as Calley was talking about, the successional issue right now with aging farmers or aging out, young people coming in, the way that you bring young people in is creating entrepreneurial opportunities that they are creating. We don't need government subsidies. We don't need government agencies. All we need is to unleash the power of entrepreneurial practitioners around the country to access their neighborhoods with food, and we will accomplish what Bernie Sanders is running around asking to stop the oligarchy, stop the oligarchy. Well, the way you stop it is not with a bigger bully government program. We've tried that for 100 years, and look where it got us. It got us to centralization, consolidation, and concentration. What we need is to unleash the American entrepreneurial spirit on our neighborhoods and let us interact in food transactions without asking the nanny state permission.
Well, I knew I could. No, that's the next one. So I knew
That's the next one.
I knew I could count on Joel to end it with a bang. So please join me in welcoming all of our guests today and thanking them. I'd like to welcome Dr. Jay Richards to the stage.
Well, welcome. We're going to sort of, in this panel, the first was sort of focused much more generally on what is regenerative agriculture and some of the sort of common objections or insights or misunderstandings. We're going to focus on a really kind of a single misunderstanding or misconception on this panel. And it's essentially this question, well, regenerative and organic agriculture, is that like going back to the hunter-gatherer stage? What is this exactly, right? It's somehow anti-technology. But technology can be different things. Technology is ultimately an expression of the human capacity to create as creatures made in the image of God. We don't create things out of nothing like God does. We take the things God has created and can transform them for good or for ill, or most of the time, because we're fallen human beings, for some good that's a real good in the short term, but sometimes have negative costs that we didn't anticipate in the long term. And so I think that's the kind of space in which we want to locate this discussion. So let me just first very briefly introduce our panelists. First is Colleen Kavanagh, who spent her career in federal food policy inside the food industry with a mission to improve wellness in the country. She also worked as a congressional staffer here in Washington and has continued to work to improve child nutrition, working and founding nonprofits. She left policy work to found ZEGO, a gluten-free food company, and pioneered its purity verification system, which gives consumers on-pack instant access to test results. I don't know what that means, so you'll tell us, for pesticides, heavy metals, and gluten. And as of this May, she's also CEO of the Collaborative Integrated Value Chain, a Montana-based grain processing hub that helps farmers and brands bring organic and regenerative grains to market at prices consumers can afford. And you live in San Francisco, California, right? So sorry about the California barbs. We love California.
In Montana.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, so it's nicely balanced. Second is Carter Williams, who is the Chief Executive Officer of iSelect Fund. Since 2014, iSelect Fund has invested in ag tech and health tech companies that are redefining the food and health system, emphasizing yield, taste, nutrition, and sustainability to combat obesity, reduce waste, and tackle metabolic diseases. With over 60 firms in its portfolio, iSelect seeks to advance crop quality, minimize fertilizer use, and innovate in healthcare to cut costs and fast-track health improvements. Over time, his company has shifted from yield to taste and nutrition, and now to enhancing nutritional density, targeting the root cause in obesity and metabolic disease, a market with vast untapped potential. Finally, John Kemp. John is an entrepreneur, a speaker, podcast host, leading crop health consultant, and designer of innovative soil and plant management systems. He founded Advancing Eco Agriculture in 2006, and he serves as Chief Vision Officer and Executive Board Chairman. Please welcome our panelists. So Colleen, let's start with you. So you have focused a lot in the consumer space, very specifically. You've had experience in branding and marketing and advertising. And so you sort of describe what you've learned and how you think that applies. That is the sort of question about consumer response in playing a role in the revival and the growth of regenerative agriculture.
That's a great question. So I started out my career on Capitol Hill and quickly learned that any policy, big food can find their way around, no matter how clever we are. So be careful what you ask for, because you might get a brown rice Krispie treat, which is what we got in the 90s when we asked for more whole grains in school meals. So be careful of the brown rice Krispie treat. When I got into having my own brand, I realized it was about transparency. Mm-hmm. There was so much that was invisible to consumers and impossible for them to quantify. They couldn't choose on anything besides the looks in the store. And the other piece of it is that they're very skeptical. They don't trust claims that say natural or even sometimes organic or the new term regenerative, right? Mm-hmm. We have to give them metrics that prove to them that this is actually different than what the alternative is. And so that's why with my brand and with our marketing, we have chosen to move to transparency around pesticides, herbicides, and heavy metals, mm-hmm. which would also be a signal to the health of the product overall. Was it, if you didn't need pesticides and you don't have a lot of heavy metals, you probably have really good soil, mm-hmm. and you're growing regeneratively and organically. We can quantify the heavy metal uptake and the pesticide residue, mm-hmm. and we can actually provide them that information in a very appealing manner.
Well, that's very handy.
For example. So we have put together, we did this in part with the USDA grant that we got from Organic Market Development Program. Mm-hmm. So we had, we wanted to be able to take parts per billion, which is really esoteric and difficult for a consumer to know, and show consumers in a very simple, color-coded system where our products are. So green, we know green means good, right? So our lead levels are low, if not undetectable. Then we show you, well, what are the other measures? Well, baby food in Europe and Taiwan are these 2 levels, and then the adult limits in those countries are here. So you can see there really is a difference. And
this is specifically for lead, this one.
This one is specifically for lead. We have it for glyphosate, we have it for arsenic, we have it for all the big 4 heavy metals, we have it for the pesticides. And you can look and see, for example, if you look at glyphosate, whether you like glyphosate or don't like glyphosate, right? The consumer gets to decide. I can show them that my oats have less than 10 parts per billion measured glyphosate, which is the lowest level. I can show you that the average American oat has 630 parts per billion in their oatmeal. So do you want 630 parts per billion in your oatmeal for breakfast, or do you want less than 10? I'm not making an evaluative decision for you. You decide if you care about that or not. And that's what consumers need. They need to be able to see the metrics for why farming practices make a difference in the health of their food.
I mean, the reality is that as consumers, both of medicine and food, most of us don't exercise informed consent for the simple reason that we're not informed. And so I'm just wondering about, there's discussion of opening up and investigating the GRAS standards, those generally recognized as safe additives and products that are in foods that just sort of pass through. Do you think that will create more opportunity as those things are disclosed, the kind of information you'd be able to supply in this way?
I think that reforming GRAS is very important. I don't think that it will get to this level.
Okay.
This really has to be a consumer-driven movement. Yep. Government can support from the other end. Standards around school meals, prison meals, Department of Defense meals, those make a huge difference. If we had we talk about rotation crops, we don't have markets for rotation crops right now. So yes, we want farmers to move to rotation crops. Where are they going to get their millet dehulled? Well, there's one place in Colorado. From California to Colorado, there's one place. Now there's 2 because I just started a mill. So we need to have the infrastructure. We need to have the demand. Americans don't eat millet. We need to grow it. It's a great weed control in Wyoming. It grows thick like a carpet. They grow it for weed control. But they don't have a market for it. And Wyoming organic farmers bury tens of millions of pounds of organic millet every year because they don't have a market, they don't have a place to dehull it. So we need more regional processing facilities like ours all around the country.
Oh, terrific, thank you. So Carter, you're on the financial side and have been for years. So you really focus, though, specifically on agriculture and health innovation, so that, that's your thrust. It's not a sort of general fund. But so what criteria do you use to identify promising technologies in this space? Do you have a sort of system that you do in looking at different companies and startups and things like that? What do you use to evaluate these things?
We look at many of the classic things like what's the leadership of the team, what can they do in terms of really driving change. Often people say, what does every startup need? People say money, we say customers. And so we're very focused on, is that customer base exist? In this particular area, it's a very, very, very complex system. We spend 1.7 trillion on food. We spend 1.9 trillion on the healthcare cost of poor nutrition. So we're thinking about altering a $3.6 trillion market. There are 600 million farmland acres in cultivation or so. A big farm is 10,000 acres. So as we talk through these systems and the success of some of the regenerative farming, that's still at 8,000, 10,000, 20,000 on the large side out of 600 million. So then we think, okay, we got to shift this system. We really, yes, we're investors, but we're really thinking about a system shift. We're trying to move over to how do we take that 1.9 trillion of healthcare and allow farmers to really take market share from that. So move that out of the healthcare system. When we were, the quotes earlier about healthcare costs versus food, healthcare costs plus food costs for the last 100 years has been 25% of the family household budget. Almost 25% nonstop, 100 years. So forever, families have been making this trade-off between food and health. So first, we want to have a good team. That's a very standard kind of metric. But then we've got to sort of think through how to shift the industry so that we cause rapid, fast adoption. We failed at that. Those people and my peers that have come into this industry have deployed, $20 billion over the last 10 years in this space. And we, despite having some success and despite having a lot of smart people applying it, we really have not seen the returns. And so capital's not coming in. If we're going to make a change here, we got to get capital in. So I think the next shift that we need to concentrate on investors on is really much closer to the consumer. I think that the thing that has, for a lot of system design reasons, the thing that's really slowed it down is we have people that can scale regenerative. We have the lessons. Regenerative is an affordable, often costs less to operate. There's a lot of misconception around that. But we really got to get closer to that consumer. There's a general perception in the marketplace that consumers don't want better food, but yet 75% of consumers are reading the labels at the grocery store all the time. So we spend $100 billion a year on trying to lose weight. That's all. So we're much more focused in terms of our investment strategy around how do we open that up so that we trigger the demand through the supply chain, so that the CPGs change, the processing companies change, and really create that opportunity for the agricultural system.
So creating a call for supply at the demand side.
Yeah, and it's a mistake very smart, rational investors did this, but now the other challenge is the capital markets are not freeing up for this kind of thing, and the smartest people in the room in terms of how to deploy capital have underperformed because they really bet big on trying to make it happen. And so we've got a capital allocation problem. Everything that everybody's talking about here is an important thing to do, but you're going from 2 million acres maybe of regenerative practices and you want to get it up to 300 million. There's a big cognitive load. I think he'll tell you that in terms of the farmer to do this. We got to simplify that so not every farmer can apply the same level of intensity to the thinking that they have applied. And so there are those kinds of evolutions that we still need to make, and that's where we want to invest next.
Perfect. So John, I know I've seen your podcast, I've heard your podcast, I've read your website. You talk a lot about soil health and soil management, in particular to be able to reduce pesticides and fertilizers and things that are identified with industrial agriculture. I mean, so what specific technologies, and I mean technology sort of broadly, is it precision agriculture or soil sensors, do you think, are really important for optimizing soil and plant health in your thinking?
I'd like to go back to where you started the conversation, where you spoke about the idea that this is not going back to our grandparents' agriculture. And the reality is that there was a great deal of wisdom that was held in indigenous agriculture and the agricultural practices. The reality is that the farmers of 80 years ago, before they had a giant red easy button, there was a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom and information there about how to make these ecosystems work. And so where we've come to today, in the wonderful little video clip that Ryland shared with us, is we've condensed this down to 6 different practices that we consider to be broadly applicable. But the reality is that those 6 different practices don't, we've framed the conversation in terms of what the journey is like instead of what the outcomes should be. And so I think a foundational aspect of bringing this regenerative agriculture and the way that it is now being modernized is actually measuring the outcomes. And we've had different conversations about outcomes. In the previous panel, they spoke a little bit about nutritional integrity and what nutrient density looks like. Colleen spoke about the absence of toxins. And so at its foundational level, I think where there is a tremendous opportunity for technology is in actually measuring outcomes, both not just the absence of toxicity, but also the presence of quality, and then understanding how you get there. I think there is a very apt analogy between human health and medicine, the way that our agriculture is treated, and from a multidimensional perspective. But One significant shift is that similar to in human health, where we have all of this spending on pharmaceuticals to treat symptoms, we have something similar in agriculture. And this is perhaps an important concept to convey, is that we recognize that disease, degenerative illnesses, are not the cause, they're not the problem. They are the symptom of a deeper problem. And the same concept also holds true in agriculture, where we perceive insects and diseases and significant weed pressure like those are not the problem. They are a symptom of a deeper problem, of an ecological problem, of a nutritional imbalance or microbiome imbalance problem. So to come back to, within all that context, to answer your question in a nutshell, contemporary agriculture, contemporary agronomy, and agronomic management in the field has largely been defined in terms of chemistry for the last 100 years or since the Green Revolution, for the very good reason, the very simple reason that chemistry was the one thing that we could measure and manage relatively easily. Mm-hmm. And we now stand on the threshold of a revolution in measuring biology. Mm-hmm. And so I believe this regenerative agriculture approach is an approach that celebrates and prioritizes and places emphasis on the value of the microbiome. And as we incorporate being able to, as we develop technology to be able to measure and manage the microbiome and understand the interactions, the interplay between chemistry reactions and microbiome interactions, that will unleash the technological aspect of regenerative agriculture, similar to what we are now seeing emerge with regenerative medicine, for example.
I just want to underscore this point because it's important scientifically and also I'll say metaphysically or philosophically, but a shift from the chemical parts in agriculture and the things that we initially could measure to biological wholes and organisms and systems, which I think it's an absolute recurring theme throughout the, I'll just call this kind of regenerative farming movement. I assume there's vast theological diversity, of course, in the movement, and yet there's this kind of anti-reductionist impulse. Look, let's take organisms as they actually are in the world, as opposed to treating them as, you know, as bags of chemicals that can be reduced.
Can I build on this point just for a second? So we have invested actually in 80 companies and have made the investments, and I'll just walk you up. So at the soil level, we've brought the cost down to understand the carbon in the soil. Carbon in the soil feeds the microbiome. We've invested in Raman spectrometry and other measurements that allow us to now understand what does the microbiome look like. We have made the investments, again, in the Raman spectrometry, which is a breakthrough technology up at tissue samples to understand as the microbes pull nutrients into the crops, what are the nutrients in the crops. We then next have the capability to understand when those crops go to market. We've got, through companies like Audacious, we're able to look at the nutrient quality in that and understand whether the omega-3s, omega-6 are in balance, or whether there are various micronutrients, and so we can look at the macros and the micros. Didn't have that before. Then as we evolve that, we've moved the food science to the point that we can look at both the core food, supplements or fortifications through a lot of derivative stuff that was done out of the Human Genome Project to understand how to bulk up the nutrition and really make the trade-offs between affordable food and such. We've got that technology in place. The next step that we've done is at the microbiome in the human, we are digging in and really understanding the degree to which if you feed people in a particular way and you give them more fiber, how does the microbiome boost things and both help things like Alzheimer's and the mitochondria. And then finally, we're now moving into the edge of taking genetics. We've gone from genetics down to RNA to proteomics. We can now, with proteomics, with other investments we've made, we can look at the expression of that food on that human to understand whether it's affecting their mitochondria and such. So in a sense, we have all the building blocks to really, nobody has stitched this together, NIH hasn't stitched it together, but we've made the investments to be able to go all the way from the soil. If you integrate that data, we're now at a point with the big data kind of world where it would be possible for us to be able to say, that measure that he's doing in the soil, which he understands, we can do the scientific basis to understand how that expresses in different humans. That's the technology we've invested in over the last 10 years.
Wow.
Round of applause.
Yeah,
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So my add-on, my piece where I focus is how, with the mom walking in the grocery store with a toddler on her hip and a baby in the basket, how does she choose the food that right, is going to be helping her to keep her healthcare costs down, keep her family healthy, keep her family employed? And there's a number of ways you can do it. The technology can be very simple. It can be very complicated. You can have, we know in produce, one of the best things is buy closer to the date of harvest, right? If we had, when was this harvested, signs across the grocery store, it doesn't cost a lot of money, right? But we know the nutrients are going to be higher. We know that then ultimately farmers will be breeding for, yet not for longevity on the shelf, because the Safeway or whoever, the Albertsons, whatever it is, says we got this romaine lettuce 10 days ago, and you have a choice of lettuce that was harvested yesterday, you're going to choose the lettuce that was harvested yesterday, right? The other thing is QR codes. We use QR codes on packaged goods, harder with produce, but in ZEGO, that's how we connect you to our system. But there's also a pilot project going on with a company called Climate Chain, where you can actually take your phone and go through the bodega, and you can take a picture, basically scan the tortilla chips section. You could have already preloaded, I want no more than 3 ingredients, I want it to be organic, I want it to be gluten-free, and it will pop to you. So there, now the mom no longer has to be reading labels. She already told the system what she wants, but that system needs a market. So there is technology. There's easy technology. There's more complicated technology.
Well, and you mined lots of USDA data and other data, right, in developing your purity system. I mean, how did this go?
Yes. So that, and actually my economist who helped me do that is sitting in this room. Yes, we found out it's a disaster. So there's decades of data out there done by USDA and FDA that measures the pesticide residue levels and the heavy metal levels in many foods across the spectrum over the years. And basically nothing's being done with it. All we're doing is watching the demise, right? We're watching the nutrient levels go down. We're watching heavy metal uptake happen, but we're not going into why that's happening. How do we direct that data and that research so that we know, oh, well, wait, heavy metal uptake went up, but that was in farms that weren't rotating crops. That was in farms that weren't doing these particular methods. We need to do something with the data, not just collect the data. So the data informs the markets. Data creates markets. We see it all the time. And whether it's good, bad, or bad data, right? An Instagram influencer publishes something that says data and it's wrong, suddenly the whole industry has been disrupted, right? So we need the good data, and we need our government in their unique position to be not only using their own data, but to talk to companies like Audacious and others who are also collecting their own data. And let's bring this together. Let's not have government be isolated from the private sector. Let's have them work together to bring about better food.
I mean, data is being collected, but it's just apparently either not sufficient or not useful.
It's impossible to get into. It's really hard to discern what is in there. And then sometimes the way that they're doing it, for example, heavy metals, they give you the number as though it is cooked. Well, rice is mostly water, right? It's going to absorb more than its weight in water. A lot of the oatmeal, you're getting more of the water standard than what's actually in the oatmeal. So if you're telling, that you have to not look at the cooked, you have to look at the base value uncooked. But it protects certain industries.
Right. Yes. I mean, it's exactly the same thing, of course, in drugs, too. I mean, the VAERS system and the AIR system, which presumably would give us some information, but it's almost designed to prevent us from getting exactly the information we need. It's absolutely crucial. Well, so Carter, I mean, of course, everybody, at least in this town right now, is talking about artificial intelligence, talking about robotics, Internet of Things. It's always risky when you have politicians talking about these things, because they're always about 5 years behind where things are. But I mean, setting those things aside, I assume that something good and bad could be said about all of them. What technologies do you think hold the most potential in this area to be genuinely useful and a force multiplier for regenerative ag?
Yeah, we look at a lot of technologies, so I'll give you some examples of ones that will be helpful, but I don't want it to be just this list. John now is a bot. Last week you launched, and you've now served 3,500 people looking for questions about how to farm better. Real questions. The list of questions that they're asking his bot are pretty geeky. How many people could you do that as a human? Probably not 3,500 in a week. So now all of a sudden you can take the knowledge that's hard to understand and put in that. AI. So we talk about changing labels at the grocery store. Labels are a 50s vintage kind of concept. We saw a startup that has Greenfield Robotics, they weed with robots, and the corn that's sold from Greenfields, from fields that use Greenfield, have a little picture of the Greenfield robot on the corn package at the store to basically say, weeded by a robot. They didn't say we didn't use Roundup, but that's signaled to the human. So an issue that we have also that I think AI will help is there's one thing to use AI to do the job better. There's the other thing to use AI to understand, in your case, what's the right thing to do. So I've personally, some people have seen this, I took all my function health data, stuck it in, and I took the USDA standards and said, tailor my food to me, which it did. And then I took my function health report, which was 150 biomarkers, stuck that in AI, and said, tailor the USDA food standards based on the fact that I overexpress on this one lipid genetic marker, which none of here probably understands what any of that is. But it did, and it informed me better on what I should be doing. So I think what we should be seeing is we have substantially reducing the friction it takes for people to access John's knowledge, people who are practitioners. So we go from 2 million acres of regenerative to 200 million acres of regenerative. And then for the people at retail, that you should be able to walk into a grocery store and it shouldn't be a cognitive load. You shouldn't have to read the label. When you walk into a grocery store today, it is hard to make a good decision. When you walk in the grocery store in the world of technology we're moving to, it should be easy to make a good decision. And that should be in the background. You shouldn't need a manual. When you use your iPhone, you don't need a manual. They've spent $1 billion engineering that iPhone so it's easy to use. And it's our responsibility with the technology now to leverage this, particularly AI, to make it easy for a consumer to walk in, make the right decision, and eliminate that $1.9 trillion of healthcare costs because they don't have to think about it.
No. Wow. Okay, John, I want to hear a little more about this bot. So was this, I assume, a large language model trained on what? A survey or on all your podcasts, or how does this work?
Yeah, well, there's actually two. So let me clear up the possible confusion here. So there is a bot that has been trained on only my information, so the podcast and only the things that I've published. And yeah, people have been highly entertained by the answers they've been getting out of that. But also, one of the challenges, if you want to get into this regenerative agriculture space and do it well, is that there is so much knowledge that is required in order to manage well. If you're really going to identify and address root causes, then first you have to understand those root causes. Why do I have aphids on my pea crop? And then how can you manage that and what can you do about it? So the previous panel spoke very aptly about the use of pesticides has been a very big easy button because it no longer required us to really understand cultural management practices and ecosystem management to solve these problems. And the reality is that a lot of that information today or historically has been difficult to access, but the use of AI gives us a pathway to democratize access to that information. And so to that end, we just recently released a regenerative AI agronomist called FieldLark. FieldLark.
Okay.
That we released, what is it now, a week ago, almost 2 weeks ago. And that has been incredibly popular. People have really loved the answers they've been able to get out of that because they're now able to ask root cause questions and say, why do I have this disease or why do I have this insect problem? And they're able to get solutions and answers to address root causes instead of just addressing symptoms. And so that is one of the significant needs is that there is so much knowledge and wisdom needed to manage ecological systems well. And a lot of that has been lost historically, and this gives us an easier pathway to access that historical information.
Well, you talked a bit earlier about the kind of loss of the tacit knowledge and practice knowledge of earlier generations of farmers. But when I listen to you, you know a whole lot about ecology and systems biology and all these things. This is the result of knowledge. I think that would surprise people that are, if they have a stereotype in their minds of regenerative agriculture, that you're making these things explicit. I mean, you describe things that a century ago, a farmer might have intuitively understood that something about soil health was important and needed to look a certain way. They wouldn't probably have known about the microbiome and nutrient intensity or something like that. And so I really think you're bridging both of those things, the kind of ancient tacit knowledge, but also modern scientific data.
Well, both are extremely important from a production agriculture perspective. The reality is there's this Chinese proverb, I think, that says the most valuable fertilizer is a farmer's footsteps in the field. And the reality is when you look at what is needed to implement regenerative agriculture well, there is this certain aspect, there's an aspect of stewardship. There is a need to have a certain heart to acres ratio. There's a need to have humans in the landscape that have a caring, loving relationship with that landscape and want to improve it. And so the way technology should be designed is not to replace people, as it so commonly is. And Joel spoke to this very well. Technology should not be designed to replace people. It should be designed to make people better and to do the things that people do less well. Because the reality is there are things that people do in the landscape that technology will never be able to do, no matter how good it is. There's this creative aspect or this intuitive aspect of very good stewardship. And technology can actually help to amplify that, to amplify those strengths by helping people become more observant and ask better questions. And so there's this, the highest design, the purest design of technology should be to think about how it can optimize the strengths, the skills that people are best at as stewards, rather than trying to replace them.
Oh, that's beautiful. So, yeah, amen. Colleen, you always anticipate my question, which is let me ask the question, right? And then you can follow John, okay. So, I mean, what do you think, what's the sort of key things that could be done to increase, honestly, consumer demand for this? I mean, at the moment, you've been talking about this, the lack of information, and so that sort of access. But, I mean, I guess there's no guarantee that even if all that information is available, that consumers will actually prefer those things, right? Maybe they're going for maximum parts per billion for glyphosate or something, right? I don't know. And so, I mean, have you thought about just in terms of the, consumers actually being interested in and being guided by genuine nutritional information in their choices?
It is tricky because marketing is so powerful, right? And what looks, even though people are flipping over to look at the back, they don't necessarily even understand what's on the back. And the back might not actually be reflective of exactly what they're getting. Right. And they might not understand it, but the front of the pack is really persuasive. We have ZEGO has an oatmeal, our plain oatmeal. We work with a high protein seed that's hulless, that requires less inputs to actually get to market. We work with farmers in the mountain regions in the US, and it has more protein, iron, and fiber than the next competitive brand that is a added value. So they're adding in seeds, they're adding in collagen, they're adding in, we have more nutrition in just our oats because the oats are so good, because our farmers did such a good job, because our seed was so strong. How does the consumer know that? Like, that's impossible, right? There is a lot to branding. Brands can work hard to differentiate this on pack, but the brands need transparency into what they're buying also. And I think that's where the suppliers really need to step up and can do more to differentiate in the supply chain in the middle. So in our mill, Civic, we serve ZEGO, which is my brand, but we also serve other brands as well. And we have different levels. So we have regular conventional. We have conventional that is purity verified. So that's where I see the regenerative coming in. For people who don't have regenerative certification, we can quantify that they have clean food. And then we also have organic, and we purity verify that as well. So Azure Standard can come in and tell me what level do they want, and then they can boast about that. They can use our metrics, right? And we can pull that through to them. But we do also need that easy answer for people who follow influencers and don't have time to do it in the store. Right. And we need those influencers to be really well informed, because not all of them are. Yeah. And the damage that an influencer can do when they grab a quick piece of information and run with it, they can destroy a market of very healthy food. So I would just have a call out to influencers. You have a responsibility to be very careful. The last thing we want is scares in the supply chain that aren't valid. We've got enough to worry about.
Wow. So Carter, I mean, hearing from Dave in the previous panel talking about this being a sort of long-term play, especially if you're a farmer that's transitioning from a sort of industrial model to more regenerative. And I think that's got to make it difficult to figure out how to invest in this because, of course, investors are often interested in short-term gains. Do you think there's some technologies that might shorten the amount of time in that transition so that these types of agricultural practices could become profitable and investment worthy earlier rather than later?
Yeah, I think maybe we can speed some of it up. There's a certain amount of that soil biology that needs a bit of time to move, and then there are some uncertainties even in biologics that we've invested in. There's some question as to whether they do or don't help. So I think that the investment signal, actually investors in this area are okay with being long in many ways. They just want to be sure that that you're moving to reduce the risk. And the way the commodity system works, when we think about why do we have what we have, in 1945 we had 20, 30 bushel corn. It's 30 bushels per acre. We now have 330 bushels per acre. So and why did we do that? In 1945, we said the reason we're having world wars is because of famine. People used famine as a strategic reason, and we set about to say, let's boost production to end famine. And by 2010, we had an equivalent amount of calories being produced as being consumed. So for many years, we focused on that. But when you look at like USAID, you look at the crop subsidy programs, when you really dig into those were all programs to get global stability. And in 1945, that made a lot of sense. We boosted yield, we took away nutrition. So I think a challenge in this is we have as investors is, I easily lost, a bunch of us lost probably $500 million on an investment related to trying to deliver better protein out of soy to eliminate antibiotics in chicken. That was really the commodity system of sustainable aviation fuel coming in and dumping commodity meal back into the market and competing against us. So to some degree, we have a bigger challenge here a little bit in that if the market starts to draw, we want the market to draw in more nutrition. But at the same time, you have a commodity production system that we invented in part for global stability, which made sense at the time, but now it's got to be disassembled because how it interferes with the ability for good technology to move forward means that even if we're the smartest investors, we lose because someone decides to underwrite SAF for some particular good reason or bad reason, whatever, and it completely devastates an investment that it takes us 10 years to yield because they've just changed the marketplace on us in a way that we never anticipated ahead of time. And that's where the investors are having a hard time.
That makes sense.
Is that instability.
So John, we always ask this question about scalability, which is usually a sign that we can't think of a better word. And what we're trying to get at, we sort of recognize this trade-off that was made after World War II. And there's a lot to be said for increasing yield and driving down the cost and increasing the availability of food when people are literally starving and don't have enough calories. That's not our problem in the United States of America anymore. Scalability, it's a sort of economic term. And so the idea is, you got these economies of scale, and the larger the economies of scale, the lower the price per unit of whatever it is you're producing. There's also diseconomies of scale, though, and things that certain operations that you actually lose what you're trying to do at a certain level. And so I'm just wondering if there's a better way to conceive of this. I mean, rather than scalability, multipliability. Because when I hear you speak, and Rick Clark mentioned this in the previous panel, there are so many very specific regional details, so that a practice that makes perfect sense in Virginia or South Carolina it ain't going to work in North Dakota. And so is there some sort of better way of thinking of that? What would post-industrial agriculture that uses these practices look like? Would some of them be huge, or would there be more people doing a much more sort of refined task, or some mix?
Well, I think Joel spoke to this very well also when he spoke about the need to have more people in the landscape. And actually, I think this is a significant challenge that we need to be thinking about for the the development and the scalability or the expansion, the implementation of regenerative agriculture on scale is that at its foundational level, when we talk about regeneration, maybe we should become clear first about what exactly regeneration is and why it matters. So when you look at it, regeneration from a first principles perspective, foundationally what we're talking about is regenerating relationships. And that means regenerating relationships at all levels, regenerating relationships between microbes and plants, between livestock and the landscape, between farmers and their vendors and the supply chain that they offtake. It's regenerating relationships at all levels. And you start thinking about, all right, well, what exactly does regenerating a relationship mean? What is the state of a degraded relationship? A degraded relationship is a relationship that is extractive. It's self-serving, it's selfish, it benefits one at the expense of the other. A regenerative relationship are relationships that are collaborative and that are symbiotic and that serve the greater good. And when you think about what that means in the context of humans and people in the landscape, where your question came from, the reality is that at its most fundamental level, at its most foundational level, regenerative agriculture needs to be about regenerating the capacity for stewardship. So there are two very different views of people in the landscape. One view, the view held by environmentalists, is that the best way to regenerate ecosystems is to remove people from the landscape. And the other view, the one which I hold to, is that the fastest way to regenerate relationships is to have people as loving, caring stewards in that ecosystem as a hyper-keystone species, where they guide and direct all the other keystone species. And that is, in fact, the most rapid way of regenerating ecosystems or regenerating agriculture. And of course, to do that requires having more people in the landscape who have that loving, caring relationship and stewardship relationship. And right now, this is one of the foundational pieces we need to think about over the mid to long-term horizon, is we need more people in the landscape, not fewer. And to Joel's previous point, there needs to be a pathway for them to learn, to gain experience, working for other farms, working with other farms. And so there's a critical need right now for us to engage more people in actively learning about these ecosystems who can propagate that stewardship management into the future.
Oh, beautiful stuff. I like the metaphysical questions, obviously, but I know we're supposed to be talking about technology. So let's do sort of lightning rounds. We've got a few minutes for any of you, or all of you, the final question. So first one, if you could fast track one technology to transform regenerative and organic agriculture in the next 5 years, what would it be and why? So you could just run through all the regulatory barriers.
Let's just remove the regulatory barriers. All right, I'll follow on this. This has a bit of echoes of Joel's free market comments, but there are, when I think about barriers to adoption or barriers to development of technology that would facilitate regenerative agriculture, there are two significant ones that I see. One of them is our intellectual property protection framework, and the other is regulatory barriers that are associated with that. So what I mean is that our intellectual property protection framework, the reason we have GMOs and pesticides today as the dominant, as being dominant in the marketplace, is because those were protectable intellectual property, because we could identify specific mechanisms, specific modes of action, and protect those. The way that ecological ecosystems work and microbial ecosystems work is you don't have single mechanisms and single modes of actions. You have a community of microbes and a community, a synergistic effect of plants and microbes that produce certain outcomes. If there were a pathway to, instead of having, so the way this has manifested is we have a particular disease, let's say powdery mildew, and someone identifies that there is a single organism that is effective at preventing that disease. So now, as that product is developed and goes through the regulatory pipelines, we end up with a product where we have one microbe for a specific disease. That goes out into the field and it ends up being successful as an application maybe 40 or 60% of the time, because that's not the way these microbial ecosystems actually work. It's not one microbe for one problem. It's a diversity of microbes, a community for one specific problem. So that is one aspect. And then the other aspect is that very frequently these biological or biocontrols, I would say, will have a community or a consortium of microbes and plants and certain ecosystem aspects for a specific problem that is very context specific. So you develop a product that is narrow spectrum instead of broad spectrum. Glyphosate, for example, is extremely broad spectrum, works on everything. And whereas if you develop a treatment for powdery mildew on cherries, it may not be effective at all for powdery mildew on cucumbers. And so as a result, the market focus required for biological type products is often very specific and very narrow. And the regulatory cost to gain access to the marketplace is too large for specific products, for specific context products. So kind of by default, the regulatory burden only allows for the development of large-scale, broad-scale applications instead of specific applications. So those are two challenges that I see.
Wow.
The most powerful force in our economy is the consumer, so things that empower the consumer to do what they need to do to improve their health and their food, and therefore use that as a price signal, classic Hayek price signal back into the market. And then I think at the farm level, the technology to make it easier, like this is an oversimplification, but much easier for the agricultural system to understand their soil health and to understand, in a sense, if the consumers downstream are looking for X, we as in agriculture, how do we shift our system from producing yield to producing nutritional density?
I'd go back to transparency with the consumer. How do we get the transparency and how do we get it to the consumer in a really easy fashion? So walking through with that phone and scanning all the yogurts, and then all of a sudden the one appears or the 5 appear that meet your standards. That speeds your shopping, so you love to use it. And also helps to the supplier then to differentiate and get that information to you. I think we cannot let suppliers off the hook here. Processors, we have a lot of processors who treat farmers like they are just dropping off something, anything. And they just say, accept, reject, go, and they don't stand by the farmers and they don't work with them. We need suppliers, lots of regional processors around the country, which we've lost. Montana is littered with empty mills that used to exist, that do not exist anymore. So a lot of farmers who want to move to rotational crops cannot do that because they do not have a market to sell those crops into. If we had simple things like the school lunch program, et cetera, having a millet, sorghum, buckwheat toast that they serve, or a waffle or whatever it is, that has created a market. So we do need the technology, but we also have simple solutions where we can drive demand, not just with the consumer, but the government as the consumer. The government has a lot of power in that $170 billion that we spend on these national feeding programs. Let's take advantage of that and let's make that change, starting with the government as well.
Couple points in here. So we do need to recognize, we've talked a lot about toxins and things. 238 people die every single day of type 2 diabetes. Every single day. The sugar load and what we need to do in CPGs is an immediate issue. In areas where we have seen reformation in the quality of food, universally the successful programs have been government and companies working together. I do think that we need to, I don't know if it's a Nixon in China moment, but we do need, I think that them being able to steer in the same direction. We do know companies are scared about the environment. They're worried about some of the attacks, maybe they're deserving or not, but the shift to the next level is going to be through corporations innovating. And pretty much all the corporations we talk to right now are not going to invest because they're afraid they're going to get sued. They're afraid about the policy uncertainty. And so maybe they deserve that, but they're not going to do anything until some of that cleans up. And I think that both government and corporations need to just sit in the room quietly in the background and say, look, this is a problem. We're responsible for this obesity problem. We could easily be sued. We could easily turn this into the cancer thing. But we really need to just sit down and just solve the problem.
Carter, that's terrific. Well, that's our time for today. Thank our panel, John, Carter, Colleen. Thank you so much. And thank all of you that joined us here today. You please stay afterwards for lunch. And thank also all of you that were watching on live streaming and C-SPAN. Thanks and have a good day.